The notification pinged on my phone at 11:23 p.m., 3 hours after I'd finally gotten my daughter to sleep. It was a news alert I'd been dreading for months, but somehow still wasn't prepared for. MegaCorp acquires Green Wheel Delivery for $340 million. My heart sank as I read those words, knowing exactly what they meant for my company, EcoFleet, and the thousands of drivers who depended on us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This wasn't just another acquisition in the cutthroat world of delivery logistics. This was the final piece of a carefully orchestrated plan to eliminate every independent delivery service in the Pacific Northwest. MegaCorp, the tech behemoth that had already swallowed DashQuick, RapidRun, and LocalLink over the past 18 months, had just purchased my last remaining competitor. Which meant tomorrow morning, I'd wake up as the only thing standing between them and complete market domination. I'd built EcoFleet from nothing 5 years ago, with a simple mission: prove that delivery services could be profitable while treating drivers fairly and protecting the environment. Our electric vehicle fleet, living wage guarantees, and sustainable packaging had earned us a devoted customer base in Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. We were small but mighty, handling about 12% of the regional market with just 2,800 drivers compared to MegaCorp's sprawling empire of 45,000 contractors. But being small made us vulnerable, and I'd watched with growing alarm as MegaCorp systematically eliminated the competition. Their strategy was brilliant in its simplicity: acquire every player large enough to matter, then use predatory pricing to crush anyone else who dared to compete. Each acquisition came with the same corporate speak about enhancing customer experience and leveraging synergies, but the reality was darker. Within months of each purchase, driver benefits were slashed, environmental initiatives were quietly discontinued, and prices were jacked up once customers had nowhere else to go. The Green Wheel acquisition hit particularly hard because Sarah Chen, their founder, had been more than just a competitor. We'd started our companies around the same time, faced the same challenges breaking into a market dominated by venture capital-backed giants, and even collaborated on industry sustainability standards. Sarah had sworn she'd never sell to MegaCorp, calling them everything wrong with corporate America, at a conference just 6 months ago. I called her immediately, but the number went straight to a message saying it was no longer in service. Her LinkedIn profile had already been updated to show her as Strategic Advisor at MegaCorp, a title I knew meant absolutely nothing beyond a hefty payout and a non-compete clause. Sarah was gone, and with her, any hope of maintaining competitive balance in our region. Sleep was impossible that night. I paced around my home office in Southeast Portland, calculating and recalculating the math that kept coming out the same way. MegaCorp now controlled 87% of the delivery market in our region. They could afford to operate at a loss indefinitely, undercutting our prices until we ran out of cash. Their massive scale meant they could negotiate supplier deals we couldn't match, secure exclusive partnerships with major retailers, and lobby for regulatory changes that would favor established players over startups. By morning, I'd made a decision that would have seemed insane just 24 hours earlier. Instead of panicking or immediately calling my investors to discuss a potential sale, I was going to fight. Not just for EcoFleet, but for every driver who'd chosen us because we treated them like human beings instead of disposable contractors. For every customer who'd supported us because they believed business could be a force for good. For every entrepreneur who'd ever faced a monopolistic giant and refused to surrender. The first step was understanding exactly what I was up against. I'd been tracking MegaCorp's acquisition strategy for months, but now I needed to dig deeper. Their SEC filings painted a picture of a company using their massive war chest to eliminate competition through what economists call predatory acquisition. They weren't buying companies because they wanted their technology or talent, they were buying them to shut them down. The pattern was unmistakable across multiple industries. In ride-sharing, they'd acquired 7 regional competitors in the past 3 years, immediately discontinuing their services and folding their operations into MegaCorp's platform. In food delivery, they had done the same thing in smaller markets across the Midwest, creating local monopolies that allowed them to raise prices and cut driver pay without fear of customers defecting to competitors. What made their strategy particularly insidious was how they targeted companies with strong ethical reputations. Greenwheel hadn't just been a competitor. They'd been a symbol of values-driven business in the delivery space. By acquiring them, MegaCorp wasn't just eliminating competition, they were co-opting the sustainability movement and neutralizing the moral argument against their practices. I spent the morning reaching out to former employees at the companies MegaCorp had acquired, using LinkedIn to track down drivers, managers, and founders who'd lived through the transition. The stories were remarkably consistent. Initial promises about maintaining company culture and values, gradual changes that seemed minor at first, then wholesale elimination of everything that made the original company special. Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been a senior manager at DashQuick, agreed to meet me for coffee at a spot in the Pearl District. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes from watching something you helped build get systematically destroyed. He offered me a retention bonus to stay for the integration, he told me, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. Good money, really good money. But by month 3, it was clear they weren't integrating anything. They were harvesting. Customer lists, driver databases, delivery routes, they took everything valuable and junked the rest. He paused, looking out the window to the busy street where delivery drivers from multiple companies used to compete for customers. Now it was almost exclusively MegaCorp's distinctive purple vehicles. The worst part was the drivers, he continued. These were people who'd chosen DashQuick because we offered benefits, predictable schedules, and honest communication about earnings. MegaCorp converted them all to contractors, cut their effective hourly rate by 30%, and eliminated the health insurance subsidy. Half of them quit in the first 6 months. That conversation crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. This wasn't just business competition. It was a fundamental battle over what kind of economy we wanted to live in. MegaCorp represented the worst impulses of modern capitalism, the idea that market domination justified any strategy, that workers were expendable resources, and that environmental responsibility was a luxury for companies that couldn't afford to maximize profits. EcoFleet represented something different. We'd proven that a delivery company could pay drivers living wages, use sustainable practices, and still generate healthy profits. Our success threatened MegaCorp's narrative that their exploitative practices were necessary for efficiency and innovation. By afternoon, I'd made another crucial discovery. MegaCorp's acquisition spree wasn't just aggressive, it might actually be illegal. The Federal Trade Commission had specific guidelines about mergers and acquisitions that created undue market concentration. And MegaCorp's regional dominance was looking like a textbook case of monopolistic behavior. I started researching antitrust law with the intensity of someone cramming for a final exam. The legal framework was complex, but the basic principle was clear. Companies weren't allowed to use acquisitions to eliminate competition and create monopolies that harmed consumers. If I could get my hands on that study, it might provide the evidence needed to trigger a federal antitrust investigation. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of fighting this battle alone, I was going to take it to the one institution powerful enough to challenge MegaCorp's monopolistic ambitions, the United States Department of Justice Antitrust Division. I had no idea if a small delivery company from Portland could successfully take on one of the world's largest tech corporations. But I knew that if I didn't try, there might not be any independent delivery companies left to fight for. The Department of Justice building in downtown Seattle felt like a fortress designed to intimidate. Walking through those imposing glass doors at 9 a.m. sharp, I clutched a briefcase containing 18 months of meticulously documented evidence that would either save my company or mark me as a delusional entrepreneur tilting at corporate windmills.
Assistant Director Martinez greeted me in a conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. She was younger than I had expected, with sharp eyes that suggested she'd heard plenty of complaints about big tech companies and wasn't easily impressed. Her first question cut straight to the heart of my case. Miss Parker, we get dozens of complaints about MegaCorp every month. What makes your situation different from a standard business dispute? I opened my laptop and pulled up the presentation I'd spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting. The first slide showed a map of the Pacific Northwest with color-coded market share data spanning 5 years. In 2019, 12 independent delivery companies served the region. By early 2024, only EcoFleet and Greenwheel remained.
Now, with yesterday's acquisition, MegaCorp controlled 87% of the market. This isn't about normal competition, I explained, clicking through charts that showed the systematic pattern. Every acquisition followed the same playbook. MegaCorp offers premium prices to companies that pose ethical competition to their business model. They specifically target companies with strong environmental records, fair labor practices, or innovative technologies that might pressure them to improve their own operations. Martinez leaned forward as I showed her the timeline. DashQuick had been developing electric vehicle charging infrastructure that threatened MegaCorp's gas-guzzling fleet strategy, acquired and discontinued within 6 months. LocalLink had created a driver profit-sharing program that was gaining attention from labor advocates, purchased and immediately converted to standard contractor arrangements. RapidRun had pioneered same-day carbon-neutral delivery, bought out and their green technology shelved indefinitely. The pattern is clear, I continued. MegaCorp isn't acquiring these companies to integrate their innovations or compete more effectively. They're eliminating business models that prove their exploitative practices aren't necessary for profitability. What I didn't tell Martinez immediately was that I'd been preparing for this moment much longer than the past few days. 8 months ago, when MegaCorp acquired DashQuick, I'd started what I called my monopoly insurance policy. Recognizing that I might eventually be the last independent company standing, I'd begun documenting everything that could support an antitrust case. Every MegaCorp press release got saved and analyzed. Every change in their pricing strategy after an acquisition got tracked. Every former employee willing to talk about internal strategies got interviewed and their statements carefully recorded. I'd even hired a forensic accountant to analyze MegaCorp's financial reports, looking for evidence of predatory pricing in markets where they'd achieved dominance. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a call from Dr. Elizabeth Chen, an economics professor at University of Washington who specialized in antitrust research. She'd been tracking MegaCorp's acquisition strategy for an academic paper and had stumbled across something remarkable. I've been analyzing their pricing patterns, she'd explained during our coffee meeting in Fremont. In markets where they've eliminated all significant competition, their delivery fees increase by an average of 43% within 12 months. Driver compensation drops by an average of 31%. These aren't normal market adjustments. They're the behavior of a company that knows customers have nowhere else to go. Dr. Chen had agreed to serve as an expert witness if needed, and her academic credentials gave weight to arguments that might otherwise sound like sour grapes from a threatened competitor. More importantly, she'd connected me with a network of economists and policy researchers who'd been tracking similar patterns across multiple industries. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew documentation alone wouldn't be enough. The DOJ needed to see that MegaCorp's behavior was actively harming consumers and workers, not just threatening my business. That's where my secret weapon came into play. For the past 6 months, I'd been quietly building relationships with drivers who'd worked for companies MegaCorp had acquired. What started as informal conversations had evolved into a systematic documentation project. Driver after driver told the same story: initial promises during the transition, followed by steady erosion of pay, benefits, and working conditions. Carmen Santos had been a driver for LocalLink for 3 years before the acquisition. She chose them specifically because they offered predictable schedules and health insurance contributions. Within 4 months of MegaCorp's takeover, she'd been converted to a contractor with variable hours and no benefits. Her effective hourly wage had dropped from $18 to $12, and she'd been forced to take a second job to make ends meet. They called it increased flexibility, Carmen told me during one of our recorded conversations. But flexibility for who? I went from knowing my schedule 2 weeks in advance to getting assignments the night before. I went from being able to plan my life to scrambling every day just to pay rent. Her story was echoed by dozens of other drivers across the region. MegaCorp's acquisition strategy wasn't just eliminating competition, it was systematically degrading working conditions for thousands of people who depended on delivery driving to support their families. I'd also been tracking the environmental impact of MegaCorp's market dominance. Before their acquisition spree, competition among delivery companies had driven rapid innovation in sustainable practices. Electric vehicles, optimized routing to reduce emissions, and eco-friendly packaging had become standard features as companies competed on environmental responsibility. Once MegaCorp eliminated that competition, environmental initiatives quietly disappeared. Their electric vehicle pilot program was discontinued. Carbon offset partnerships were allowed to expire. Sustainable packaging requirements were relaxed to cut costs. The result was a measurable increase in the environmental footprint of the regional delivery industry. Martinez reviewed my evidence with the methodical attention of someone who'd built her career on complex antitrust cases. She asked pointed questions about market definitions, competitive effects, and consumer harm. Each answer led to follow-up questions that probed deeper into the legal framework that would support federal intervention. The challenging aspect of modern antitrust enforcement, she explained, is proving that a company's size and market position actively harm competition rather than just reflecting superior business performance. MegaCorp will argue that their acquisitions improve efficiency and that any market dominance results from legitimate competitive advantages. I'd anticipated this defense and had prepared accordingly. My forensic accountant had analyzed MegaCorp's operational efficiency before and after their acquisitions. Rather than improving performance, the data showed that customer satisfaction had declined, delivery times had increased, and operational costs had actually risen once competitive pressure was eliminated. They're not succeeding because they're more efficient. They're succeeding because they're using their massive cash reserves to eliminate anyone who might force them to compete on efficiency, worker treatment, or environmental responsibility. The meeting stretched past lunch as Martinez and her team dove deeper into the evidence. They were particularly interested in the consulting study that MegaCorp had commissioned on market consolidation strategies. While I hadn't been able to obtain a copy of the full report, I'd managed to track down 2 analysts who'd worked on it. Both had confirmed that the study explicitly recommended acquiring values-driven competitors as a strategy for neutralizing reputational threats to MegaCorp's business model. One analyst, speaking on anonymity, had described internal discussions about using acquisitions to eliminate the narrative that exploitative labor practices aren't necessary for profitability. As the meeting concluded, Martinez made no commitments, but promised a thorough review of the evidence. If your allegations are substantiated, she said, this could represent one of the clearest cases of antitrust acquisition strategies we've seen in the gig economy sector. Walking out of that building, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. I'd done everything possible to build a compelling case, but now the fate of EcoFleet and thousands of workers depended on federal bureaucrats and legal processes I couldn't control. The next morning brought news that changed everything. MegaCorp had announced their intention to acquire FleetFlow, a delivery company based in San Diego that served the entire Southern California market. If that acquisition went through, MegaCorp would control over 60% of delivery services on the entire West Coast. I immediately called Martinez with the update. Her response was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. Ms. Parker, I think it's time we escalated this to the full antitrust division. Within 48 hours, I was on a plane to Washington, D.C., carrying evidence that could either bring down one of America's most powerful corporations or end my career in a spectacular legal battle I had no guarantee of winning. The call came at 6:30 a.m. Pacific time while I was reviewing financial projections in my hotel room near DuPont Circle. Assistant Attorney General Catherine Walsh's voice was crisp, with the kind of authority that comes from 2 decades of taking on corporate giants. Ms. Parker, we're filing our complaint this morning. I wanted to give you advance notice because MegaCorp's response is likely to be swift and aggressive. Are you prepared for what comes next? I'd been preparing for this moment for 3 months, but hearing those words still sent adrenaline coursing through my system. The United States Department of Justice was officially challenging MegaCorp's acquisition strategy, using EcoFleet's case as the centerpiece of their argument that the tech giant had systematically eliminated competition in violation of federal antitrust law. Within 2 hours, news of the federal lawsuit dominated every major business publication. DOJ challenges MegaCorp's delivery dominance, read the Wall Street Journal.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
MegaCorp's initial response was predictably aggressive. Their general counsel, Richard Stone, held a press conference within hours of the filing, dismissing the lawsuit as government interference in legitimate business competition, and characterizing me as a disgruntled competitor seeking regulatory protection from market forces. But something unexpected happened as the story gained momentum. Workers from across the delivery industry started speaking out publicly, sharing stories that corroborated every allegation in the federal complaint. The narrative MegaCorp had carefully crafted about efficiency and innovation began crumbling under the weight of testimony from thousands of drivers who'd experienced the reality of their business practices. Maria Gonzalez, a former Greenwheel driver, appeared on CNN describing how her working conditions had deteriorated after MegaCorp's acquisition. They promised nothing would change, she said, looking directly into the camera with the kind of quiet dignity that made her words devastating. Within 6 months, I'd lost my health insurance, my predictable schedule, and 30% of my income. They eliminated everything that made Greenwheel a good place to work. The media coverage intensified when Dr. Elizabeth Chen published her academic analysis of MegaCorp's pricing patterns in markets where they'd achieved dominance. Her research, which had been crucial to building the federal case, now became public evidence that MegaCorp had systematically raised prices and reduced service quality once competitive pressure was eliminated. This isn't speculation, Dr. Chen explained during a televised interview. We have hard data showing that MegaCorp's acquisitions have resulted in measurably worse outcomes for consumers and workers. They've used their financial resources not to compete more effectively, but to eliminate the need to compete at all. MegaCorp's stock price began declining as investors realized the company faced potential forced divestiture of their recent acquisitions. More damaging than the immediate financial impact was the reputational crisis spreading across social media, where #MegaCorpMonopoly became a rallying cry for workers and consumers frustrated with the concentration of economic power in the hands of tech giants. The legal battle intensified when MegaCorp's lawyers filed a motion challenging the federal government's jurisdiction over what they characterized as routine business acquisitions in a competitive marketplace. Their argument hinged on the claim that delivery services remained competitive because customers could still choose between multiple apps and platforms. I knew this argument was coming because I'd spent months preparing for it. Working with the DOJ's legal team, we'd assembled evidence showing that MegaCorp's apparent competition was largely illusory. Their acquisition strategy had specifically targeted companies that offered genuinely different business models, leaving only superficial variations in an increasingly homogenized market. The breakthrough moment came during discovery, when federal investigators obtained internal MegaCorp communications that revealed the true scope of their anti-competitive strategy. An email chain between senior executives discussed the Greenwheel problem and the need to neutralize their sustainability narrative before it spreads to other markets. Another message, sent 3 days before the Greenwheel acquisition announcement, was even more damning. Sarah's company proves that fair labor practices are commercially viable in delivery logistics. We can't allow that precedent to influence regulatory discussions or investor expectations. Acquisition and discontinuation of their driver benefit programs should send a clear market signal. These communications, obtained through federal subpoena power, provided smoking gun evidence that MegaCorp's acquisitions were designed specifically to eliminate business models that threatened their approach to worker treatment and environmental responsibility. The public revelation of these internal messages triggered a cascade of consequences that went far beyond the immediate antitrust case. Labor unions launched organizing drives at MegaCorp facilities across the country, using the company's own words as evidence of deliberate worker exploitation. Environmental groups filed separate lawsuits, alleging that MegaCorp's elimination of sustainable delivery options constituted a form of environmental harm. Most significantly, the evidence sparked congressional hearings on antitrust enforcement in the digital economy. Representatives from both parties expressed outrage at MegaCorp's internal communications, with some calling for broader reforms to prevent technology companies from using acquisition strategies to eliminate competition. The turning point came when Judge Patricia Hoffman ruled on MegaCorp's motion to dismiss the federal case. Her opinion was a scathing indictment of the company's acquisition strategy, finding that the evidence, quote, clearly demonstrates a pattern of anti-competitive behavior designed to eliminate meaningful competition rather than improve consumer outcomes, end quote. More importantly, Judge Hoffman granted the DOJ's request for a preliminary injunction blocking MegaCorp's proposed acquisition of FleetFlow, the Southern California delivery company. Her ruling stated that allowing the acquisition to proceed while antitrust violations were being litigated would cause, quote, irreparable harm to competition in the West Coast delivery market, end quote. The preliminary injunction marked the beginning of the end for MegaCorp's monopolistic ambitions. Facing the prospect of a protracted legal battle with the federal government, mounting pressure from investors concerned about regulatory risk, and a public relations crisis that was damaging their brand across multiple markets, the company's leadership finally agreed to negotiate a settlement. The consent decree announced 6 months later exceeded my most optimistic expectations. MegaCorp was required to divest their acquisitions of Greenwheel, DashQuick, and LocalLink, restoring competitive balance to the Pacific Northwest delivery market. They were prohibited from acquiring any delivery companies for 5 years without prior federal approval. Most importantly, they were required to maintain environmental and labor standards equivalent to industry best practices across all their operations. The human impact of the settlement was immediate and profound. Carmen Santos, the LocalLink driver whose story had been crucial to building the federal case, was offered her old position back with full benefits restored. I never thought speaking up would make this kind of difference, she told me during the celebration party we held for all the drivers who'd supported the case. But it turns out sometimes David really can beat Goliath. The settlement also established a monitoring mechanism requiring MegaCorp to report quarterly on their labor practices, environmental initiatives, and pricing strategies. Any violations would trigger automatic federal review and potential additional penalties. For EcoFleet, the outcome was transformational. With genuine competition restored to the market, we expanded our operations into Seattle and Vancouver, hiring 800 new drivers and implementing the profit-sharing program that had always been part of our long-term vision. Our electric vehicle fleet became the model that other companies worked to match rather than a competitive disadvantage in a race to the bottom. The broader impact reached far beyond the delivery industry. The MegaCorp case became a template for antitrust enforcement in the digital economy, with federal prosecutors using similar strategies to challenge anti-competitive acquisitions in ride-sharing, food delivery, and social media markets. 3 months after the settlement was finalized, I received an email that reminded me why the fight had been worth every sleepless night and every moment of uncertainty. It was from Lisa Chen, a recent business school graduate who is launching her own sustainable delivery startup in Austin. Your case changed everything for entrepreneurs like me, she wrote. Before the MegaCorp settlement, investors told me there was no point in starting a delivery company because the big players would just acquire or destroy any competition. Now they're actively looking for the next EcoFleet. You didn't just save your company, you saved the possibility that innovation and ethical business practices could compete with monopolistic power. That email sits framed on my office wall today, next to a photo from the day we announced our expansion into 3 new cities. It reminds me that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as existential threats. MegaCorp's attempt to monopolize the delivery industry had forced me to become not just a better entrepreneur, but a more effective advocate for the kind of economy I wanted to help build.
The applause that followed felt different from the polite corporate clapping I'd grown accustomed to at business conferences. It was the sound of people who understood that challenging concentrated power wasn't just about saving one company, but about preserving the possibility that innovation, ethics, and competition could coexist in the modern economy. As I walked off that stage, I thought about the email notification that had started this entire journey. At the time, MegaCorp's acquisition of Greenwheel had felt like the end of everything I'd worked to build. Instead, it had been the beginning of a fight that changed an industry and proved that even in an era of corporate giants, David could still defeat Goliath with the right evidence, the right allies, and the unwavering belief that justice still mattered in the American economy. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.